We are going to have quite the agenda for you today. After we have our welcome from Kevin, you're going to be put into small groups of four to give you some time to do some introductions, but also to start thinking about this topic, this notion of practicing economic development in rural Minnesota at the intersection of racial and social justice. What concerns do you have or what experiences you have? Then we'll be hearing from Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan. She'll have to leave us a little earlier than anticipated, but we hope to have some time for some question and answer with her as well. So please be prepared to send those in the chat. Then we're going to do a short poll, and we will have the pleasure of hearing from three practitioners who are doing just what our topic is about, practicing rural economic development at that intersection of racial and social justice. And then we're going to do a group chat. We're going to try a new experiment and see how that works to try and replicate some of the exchange that we do have with our traditional Red Group forums, even though we are in a pandemic and we don't get to do it face to face. Why don't we then move into our small groups? As I said, you will be in groups of four, and I will ask you to introduce yourselves, what you do at your organizations. Also have the opportunity to talk about the topic a little bit so that maybe you can start thinking about questions you want to ask, as I said, or concerns. And we'll give you a 1 minute warning when you will be coming back to the large group, so you'll have time to wrap up your conversations. You'll have about 12 minutes to do that, okay? So with that, I will ask our wizard, Becky LaPlante, to assign you to your groups. Please accept the invitation to go into the groups. Thank you. Okay, welcome back. I am going to introduce Kevin Lindsay, the CEO of the Minnesota Humanities Center and also a member of the Process Design Group, to do our welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. And thank all of you for joining us today. There are some times when you think being part of certain organizations is really important within your life. And I think given the events over the last couple of months, one of the groups that I really feel is critically important to myself and others within Minnesota is the Red Group. So I'm very thankful, happy to be a part of the group, and also happy that you are here today to hear a great message from our Lieutenant Governor and to continue in a steadfast way, in an earnest way, the important work of building a stronger Minnesota for all. I also have the pleasure of working with Lieutenant Governor. Sometimes we do reader books for various audiences. And this year we decided that we were going to do an early reader edition, focusing on three individuals from the Native American community who've done tremendous work. And one of those individuals is our own Lieutenant Governor. Maybe a little difficult there to see the reader, but this is hot off the presses just within the last week from the Minnesota Humanities Center. Peggy Flanagan, our Lieutenant Governor, and it talks about her path forward to becoming Lieutenant Governor within the state. Peggy and I crossed paths when I was a Commissioner of Human Rights. I know that Anne is going to give a formal, but I would be remiss not to say that I'm absolutely pleased and honored that Lieutenant Governor Flanagan is in the role that she's in, and I look forward to many wonderful things that she's going to do going forward within her political career. So, Anne, I'll let you turn it back over for the formal introduction. And again, thank you all for being part of the Red Group.
I don't have a book to share with you, but that's a great introduction, because Lieutenant Governor Flanagan has really done a tremendous amount of work at this very intersection we're looking at right now, this notion of rural economic development at the intersection of racial and social justice. So we're thrilled that she can be a part of this program. Whether she has been a nonprofit leader, whether she has been a community organizer or a member of the legislature, or as the Lieutenant Governor, she has always focused in this very space. So she's been working on behalf of children and families, people of color, indigenous communities, low-income people. As a member of the legislature, she she and another group of legislators formed the People of Color and Indigenous Caucus to ensure that the laws that were being considered also reflected and looked at the health and education and economic opportunities for people of color and Indigenous communities. She's a citizen of the White Earth Nation of Ojibwe, and she brings to the state, she brings to her work, she brings to us at the Red Group Forum a true passion for and a commitment to racial and social justice. So we're thrilled that she's here. I'm hoping that she's here. She should be signing in at any moment. What I'm going to ask is that you send questions via chat so that as she's speaking, if a question occurs to you, to shoot those in, and I will be moderating those when her time is done. We will lose her a little earlier than anticipated because she's had a conflict with her schedule, but we'll try to get in as many of the questions as we can. So, Becky, do we have the Lieutenant Governor with us?
And the Lieutenant Governor is with us.
Wonderful. Welcome, Lieutenant Governor Flanagan. We are thrilled that you're with us, and we already introduced you and said wonderful things. So I think just turning it over to you makes the most sense. Welcome to the Rural Equitable Development Group Forum.
Well, good morning. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really grateful to be with you, and welcome to my kitchen where all of the magic happens. You are getting the realist version of the Lieutenant Governor right now, which means you may hear a cat or a dog or a 7-year-old at any time. So just wanted to let all of you know. I'm just really happy to be here today, and look forward to just being able to have a bit of a dialogue with all of you. And I'm seeing some good friends here as well, which I really appreciate too. It's been hard for me, and I don't know about you, but I am an extrovert, as is the governor. And so, the maintaining social distance and doing events like this, has been really important for us to continue to stay connected and know what's happening in the community. So I appreciate it. And while we can't be together in person, it's one of the benefits is that we can gather with folks from all across the state quickly. And I think that that's a good thing. So I look forward though to the time when we all can come together in person and do so safely. It's been a difficult 6 months, to say the least. And I think it's safe to say that some of the challenges that have been presented before us are bigger than we could have ever imagined. But I also know that's why your participation and the work of the Red Group is even that more important during this time. Because successfully attacking and tackling the immense challenges that face us, has really required us to be honest about the disparities that we face here in Minnesota. And what I like to say, the need to push through those who wants pie sort of moments, which too often mean when things start to get difficult or we talk about issues of race and inequities, that Minnesotans have a habit of changing the subject to food. And it is one of the ways that we maintain this politeness, which also is one of the things that fuels, frankly, the disparities that we see and experience all across our state. So that has been, one of the things that has been necessary as we talk about the disparities that COVID-19 has certainly laid bare, that many of us knew already existed, but now certainly have been brought to the forefront for folks all across the state. Honestly confronting and eliminating systemic racism, to combating the pandemic, to dealing with the economic consequences of COVID that it's created, requires an immense amount of collaboration, partnership, and creativity. And you're bringing all of those qualities to the work that you're doing with your organizations every day. And that's what makes these cross-sectional conversations so exciting and important to moving the state forward. Today, we focus on the intersection of economic development and racial and social justice in rural communities. And frankly, it could not come at a better time. In a moment when this country is confronting its long and difficult history of systemic racism, when protests demanding change that is long overdue are resonating in all of our communities, and when we are facing a new and difficult economic reality, we have an opportunity and a responsibility to reimagine a future for all of us that is intentionally inclusive. And we're uniquely situated to do that in Minnesota, where our diversity, especially in our rural communities, is one of our greatest strengths. But being well situated to reimagine a future doesn't mean that it will automatically happen. The real work begins after we've acknowledged our shortcomings and agreed to address them together. We know, for example, that Minnesota is a great place to go to school if you're white. For our students of color and for our Indigenous students, our system too often fails. As the mom of a 7-year-old Anishinaabe little Ojibwe girl, I know that she has a 50% chance of graduating in this state. And we see similar disparities in our health outcomes. COVID has made that ever clearer. But it's how we react to those facts that makes a difference. And the most important first reaction is to listen. Creative solution-based work that is grounded in equity and justice begins with centering the people most affected by the decisions we make and making sure that they have a seat at the table. Without the voices of community at the table, how can we understand the changes that are so needed? It's also understanding that when your table looks different, the outcome that comes from that table should also look different. Our results should look different. That these changes are substantive, not just aesthetic. And as we listen, we need to work cooperatively to turn shared understanding into concrete action. Turning our commitment to racial and social justice into action from the state government is one of the core jobs that the governor and I do every single day. But make no mistake, turning a ship that has been headed in the same direction for 162 years is a pretty big undertaking. It's why the first action that the governor took when we came into office was by signing Executive Order 1901, which guides a statewide commitment to examining how we can advance equity in tangible ways across state government. Operationalizing that executive order has led to some key changes in the way that we operate. For example, it's how we reworked our internal policy development process to emphasize stakeholder engagement early and often. We don't want to be taking proposals to community after they've been fully developed and asking for a thumbs up or a thumbs down. We want a process to do this work together and to co-create. Operationalizing these changes also means working closely with our commissioners and the staff across our 24 agencies so that they are too engaging with community in a two-way dialogue. Our administration sought out commissioners dedicated to embedding equity within each agency across state government, and we continue to encourage them to examine agency processes and procedures through that lens. The goal is to build into our processes a focus on equity and racial and social justice that will exist long after we're gone. And we've traveled the state, and as we've traveled the state, it has become clear how important that work is in greater Minnesota. Our rural communities are resilient and adaptable, and they are changing. They are changing economically and demographically in exciting ways. Broadband internet is making it possible for small businesses on the Iron Range to reach international markets overseas. Smart investments and innovative companies are bringing jobs to Northwest Minnesota. And new markets in ag programming are helping to open the doors for folks who are looking to farm. But as we name a few opportunities, we also need to make sure that we are investing and promoting development in communities of color, immigrant communities, indigenous communities, all of which have too often been left out of these conversations. In fact, too many times to count. Let me be clear, investing in these communities is important at all levels. It builds a strong cultural fabric. It makes sense from an economic standpoint, but it benefits everybody across the state. That's why we worked with the legislature to pass the $62.5 million in COVID relief for small businesses. And we made sure that 50% of those grants were for Greater Minnesota and that 10 million was reserved for minority-owned businesses. It's why we fought to pass an increase in the Child Care Assistance Program provider reimbursement rates, the first since 2011, while allocating federal COVID relief funds to more than 4,200 Greater Minnesota child care providers. Because more than 60% of CCAP families are families of color, the child care providers in Greater Minnesota are under more stress than ever before. And it's why the Department of Agriculture is leading an emerging farmer work group that is focused on eliminating barriers to land access and affordable healthcare for farmers of color, veteran farmers, and women farmers. Taken alone, each of these actions is significant. Each of these actions is significant for equitable development in rural Minnesota. But combined with the work that all of you are engaged in every day, especially when investments that you make are focused on racial equity, and when we're all rowing in the same direction, we can be transformative and turn this ship around. I hope that in your conversations today that you're able to think transformatively. The panelists that you're going to hear from are certainly thinking that way, and I wish I could be staying with all of you to hear what they have to say. The work that we do is often difficult, but it's more important now than ever before. Minnesota is a state that prides itself on diversity. We welcome immigrants and refugees because we know that we are stronger together, and we will continue to speak to that important message over the coming days and weeks. We build community by pulling up chairs around the same table because we know that strong and diverse communities will make a better life for our children. And we invest in our rural communities because we know that when one part of our state thrives, all of Minnesota thrives. Thank you for your work to build racial and social justice into your investments that your organizations make. And thank you for your commitment for pushing our administration to do the same. All of our communities, rural communities, indigenous communities, and communities of color, urban communities are all better for it. Jimmy Gwitch, and I'm excited for the rest of our conversation today.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Governor Flanagan. We're really thrilled that you're here. And we're asking people to submit questions. But to start off, I was wondering if you could share any examples from your career, nonprofits, community organizing in the legislature, where economic development practitioners have done a really good job of incorporating racial and social justice into their work. If you have any little tips that we could learn from, that'd be great.
Well, I think the first piece is what I mentioned before, just being willing to have these honest conversations and take a step back and truly listen. We have a habit in this work, I think, of focusing primarily on traditions, that's the way it's always been done, versus what are the results that we want to try to achieve. And so I think, when we challenge ourselves to say, like, what's the end result? What are we trying to get to versus this is the way that it's always been done before? I think that's one of the most powerful things that we can do in government, in nonprofits, and simply across all sectors, frankly. But I think we're in a moment, clearly. I don't know about you, but the last week has felt like a lifetime, and the last 72 hours have felt like years. But we are in a moment in this country where we're having a national conversation about race and equity. And so, Minnesota has been really, we are on the forefront since in many ways, but especially since the murder of George Floyd. And we are not going to be able to Minnesota nice our way out of the challenges that we are facing in this moment. You know, for many of these conversations, I think, or these efforts have been happening in a smaller way for years and years. And so now I think it is the collective action, and that's why it makes so much sense for folks here. But one example that I do want to lift up, because I think they're doing a great job, is the Neighborhood Development Center, the work that Mike Tamale is leading, who I'm sure many of you know. I've seen some nods, that they've been doing this work really over the last, several decades. And I bring up NDC because they really have a focus on investing dollars within community, and going to communities to advise how, where and how these dollars are spent. And as opposed to investing, dollars in companies or groups, they're trying to move it into community to develop it. In the same way that we need to provide a seat for folks at the table, for folks who haven't traditionally been there, we also need to provide opportunities for people who haven't had access to business or entrepreneurial opportunities that many others have had. We recently did a visit with Mike Tamale over to Golden Time and to Amari Brow, which are two of the businesses that they're deeply connected to, that are led by entrepreneurs of color, grounded in community. I think that those are some of the examples of what it looks like when community is taking the lead and organizations are supporting community to be out front, and using their power and privilege and access to also create space for businesses of color. And so I think that that's part of it as well, is using our positions, if we are in positions of privilege or opportunity, to create that space where there might not have been that space before.
Great, thank you. And to sort of build off that, how should nonprofits or some of the other organizations that are represented within the Red Group interact with state agencies? You talked about the two-way dialogue that you are encouraging commissioners and their departments to have. How should nonprofits support that work toward this notion of greater racial and social justice and economic development work?
Well, I know you certainly will hear more from the panelists on this particular question. But I think it's a good question because it focuses on some of the collaboration, right, that we talked about a little bit earlier. The first thing that I would say is that it's important for practitioners to build relationships with the agencies that are involved in their work. And during this time of COVID, right, it becomes a little bit more difficult to have that cup of coffee, but I would just encourage people as much as you can to do so virtually and try to meet people where they're at in a safe way, of course. But I think that relationship building still remains the most important piece. Our administration has tried to stress the openness and transparency that is focused in building trust between community and state government, which, to be very candid, as a Native woman, I work in a system every day that was not created by our community or for our community, but in many ways was created to eliminate our community. And so for communities of color, for Indigenous communities, immigrant communities, refugee communities, just knowing that there already is that barrier of distrust for very good reason. So taking that time, I think really matters. By connecting with agency staff, rural economic practitioners can be part of that conversation that I mentioned earlier, the conversation about policy development that factors in community and stakeholders early and often. And this is where I say, if you don't see us doing it, push us to do it. We have set some really lofty goals, but also need to make sure that we have an inside-outside game, right, of people who are pushing us to do it. Specifically, we've created a public engagement liaison and tribal liaison positions within our office to help ensure that with our state agencies that we are doing the work to build those relationships. These liaisons are responsible for doing this engagement work. They're focused on many things across different sectors and areas, but also ensuring that racial justice and anti-racism work is built into each agency. This has been a big change for us. And so like, I want to just lift this up as one of the things that we are challenged with every day. As I mentioned before, state government is working exactly the way that it's supposed to work, the way that it has been designed to work. And so, we are trying to disrupt many of these systems. We talked a lot about diversity and equity and inclusion when we first came into office, and have realized, especially over the last several months, that simply isn't good enough. And that we need to now move into being anti-racist. So for us, what that means is that we have anti-racism tools and practices that we have started to implement across all of our work group areas for our response to COVID-19, but then also took and adapted that anti-racism framework within our policymaking. So as we're looking towards the 2021 session, that all of the policy proposals or budget investments that we are making are done through an anti-racism tool, which has been, I think, a challenge for all of us, but is exactly what is needed. The other thing that I would say is setting goals. One of the reasons in Minnesota why I think some of our gaps are so big is that we have the best intentions without setting real goals. And so for each of our agencies and then across state government, we have started, what are the specific goals? How are we naming it in each individual community, disaggregating our data and getting serious about it. And if it isn't a number goal, for organizations and industries to start to say, if it's not a number goal, how will I know it when I see it? What are the things? What is the feedback? The voices? How will I know it when I see it? And so I think that is one of the things where that meaningful engagement happens. The place where it gets lost, I think, too often is in the implementation, because we're not actually, setting goals. Like, we're for good and against evil is like a really good place to start, right? But it's not enough unless we're naming explicitly what those goals are.
Thank you. A question here: how is rural reacting to this anti-racism? What kind of feedback are you getting from rural communities?
Well, I would say for the most part, for the partners that we've been engaging with, it's been positive. I think folks are ready to have these conversations, but I think people need tools in order to do it. But I also would say this: I am not going to sugarcoat what is happening in our state right now. I think that I will say that we have leaders in both the House and Senate who get very uncomfortable and have pushed back on me and the governor when we use language like white supremacy. And say, why do you have to use such incendiary language or talk about racism? And I think, for us, and in particular, I will just say for the governor, he knows that as an older white man, that sometimes the messages that he is able to share, people hear differently than they would hear it from me. And so it also is about getting real about using that privilege and having some of these conversations. But I think we are just now past the point. We are now past the point where we can simply say, like, oh, they don't really mean it, or that's just like, people have more learning to do. that's all true, but like the state is going to pass you by. And, this is, I think, where all of us and where folks who are part of the Red Group and all of the philanthropy and higher ed and nonprofits and businesses need to also demand more and start using this language in a way where it simply is. It becomes part of our, of our culture, how we're talking about things. And that we also create spaces where people are willing to lean in a little bit more to say like, oh, that white supremacy, when you talk about racism, that's incendiary language, to start to say, what makes you say that? We don't often call the question here as well. And so in places and spaces where you can, that you start to push back. I think that those are the conversations, I think, especially that the Black, Indigenous, and people of color Minnesotans really need you to start having. That we have been used to having these conversations because we have to in order to survive. But we need our allies to also be willing to push and have these conversations too.
Thank you. To that point, someone asked if the anti-racist tool you're using to sort of screen your legislation could be shared, if perhaps we could get some reference to that and I could work with your staff after the session. But I think that would help them implement that same type of thinking.
Yeah, so I think, it's not proprietary, but I do think like we can certainly share some of the tools that we are, that we're using, and especially the questions that we're asking before moving a policy forward. So this has been used with our COVID response too. So I'm happy to have our staff work with you, Anne, to hand that over. I also know, just looking at this call, that there are people who've been doing this work too. That, we have probably likely incorporated things from the Bush Foundation or the Northwest Area Foundation, that folks have been using too, and into some of our work. But yeah, happy to share as much as we can, for sure.
Wonderful, thank you. One person who is a fan asked if you could share the Knute Nelson statue story. Thought it was worth sharing.
I appreciate that. Yeah, so right outside my office, there's a large statue of Knute Nelson. And so Knute Nelson, for those of you who don't know, was the author. He was senator, governor. Was the author of the Nelson Act, which ordered the removal of all Indigenous people in the state of Minnesota up to White Earth. It was not completely successful. But there are some days when I look out my window at the Capitol and I'm like, Knute Nelson. And there's other days where I look at that statue outside of the Capitol and I'm like, what's up, Knute Nelson? Right? Like there's an Ojibwe woman as lieutenant governor. And I don't know that when Knute Nelson was around that he would have could have seen that coming, I guess, is sort of the response there. But, that sort of informs, I think, the work that we're also trying to do with some of with all of our tribes here in Minnesota as well. And would just say, we have tribal liaisons at each of our agencies. We have a tribal state relations office now. We are doing meaningful consultation with all Native nations within the borders of Minnesota. And we are doing that because this is simply the work that the state of Minnesota should have been doing for the last 162 years. And so, for many of these things, it's hard, right? The governor and I, are only guaranteed 2 more years and some change to try to be able to implement some of these things. And so as much as we can embed them in agencies and in processes, they will be harder to undo. And so I know that I have to wrap it up here, but I would just say this, that I hope that at each of your organizations, you also have an exit strategy. And what I mean by that is that there isn't just one person who holds all the cards. And there isn't just one person who understands the anti-racism work that you're doing within your organization. And I really hope that that one person isn't just the only person of color who's at your organization, but this is something that is shared across your organization, so that if you need to take a step out or there's a new opportunity for you somewhere, that this simply has been embedded and is part of how you function and operate. And I think that is what we are trying to do at the state. And I think that that is also, how we can challenge ourselves, right, across governments, across nonprofits, across businesses, and philanthropy, to make sure that these are long lasting, and knowing that we can keep each other in check as we do this work, to call each other in when needed and necessary, because this is the work.
Thank you so much. We have so appreciated your time and your insights and your comments. And we know you have to run, so we'll thank you so much.
Chimigosh, everyone. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon. Take good care.
What I'm going to ask you to do now is to take a quick poll. We'll let you see how it builds. I'm asking, what gives you hope when you think about moving forward with this notion of incorporating racial and social justice into economic development? So take a few minutes and take a poll. Okay, well, with most people having voted, the winner is the growing awareness among rural Minnesotans that racial and social justice are integral to the future of their communities. And that, I think, is a very, very hopeful sign. So thank you very much for participating in that. I'll tell you what makes me really hopeful is the work that our next three panelists is doing, because their work and have very different experiences, very different jobs. But what they are doing is putting into practice what the Lieutenant Governor just talked about. So each of them is going to be doing a short presentation, and then we'll have time for some Q&A. So as they're making their presentations, feel free to send some of the questions to chat. But first, I'm going to introduce all of our panelists. Our first presenter is Hibo Abdi. And Hibo is the Program Portfolio Manager in the Business Development Department of the African Development Center. And she supports a portfolio of current businesses with loans, seeks others, and also provides additional services to her clients. She has an MBA in International Business from Hamlin and a Bachelor of Arts, Health Science and Management from George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. After Hibo, we will hear from Dawn Espe, who is the Senior Regional Development Planner at Region 5 Development Commission, where she oversees the Welcoming Communities Initiative, which is designed to attract and retain a qualified workforce in Region 5. She also delivers the Intercultural Development Inventory Assessment to groups and individuals to help them bridge some of the challenges working across cultures. Dawn holds a master's degree in education from the University of Minnesota Duluth and a bachelor's degree from Mankato State. And finally, we will hear from Pablo Obregon, who is the Community Engagement Officer for the Southwest Initiative Foundation. He is responsible for research and engagement for the foundation's Grow Our Own initiative and also for its diversity, equity, and inclusion. He was born and raised in Lima, Peru. He attended the Lutheran Bible Institute in California and received his Master of Divinity degree from Luther Seminary in St. Paul. He spent several years in the ministry. So please join me in welcoming this group. Please send questions to the chat, and we will start with Hibo Abdi.
Good morning. Thank you, Anne. African Development Center was launched because existing economic development organizations lack the resources needed to address the financial, cultural, and language barriers that hinder African immigrants from achieving self-sufficiency. Our aim is to facilitate economic integration as well as civic and social participation that are the mark of vibrant and healthy community. Cultural competency is the key to ADC's high level of success in meeting our objectives. African Development Center is CDFI certified, as well as SBA microloan and 7A lender. The mission of African Development Center is to grow businesses, build wealth, and increase reinvestment in the African communities of Minnesota through a comprehensive set of services in financial literacy, business development, and home ownership. ADC culturally competent resource to our state's diverse African community. We work across the state of Minnesota in rural, urban, and suburban areas and provide services to entrepreneurs from a wide range of backgrounds with varying expertise, from beginning micro entrepreneurs to sophisticated business owners employing dozens of people. ADC delivers 3 key services to African population: financial literacy education, home ownership training, and business development. Our tools include classroom workshops, individual counseling, business development, financing, and technical assistance. For our financial literacy, as African immigrants arrive in Minnesota, they have a high level of capacity and drive, but have very few assets and often very limited experience with Western financial institutions. To help, ADC offers customized training on issues such as building a credit score, personal debt management, basic banking, household budgeting, saving for college or a home. Customized to specific needs of the recipient, these sessions are usually kept private due to the sensitive nature of that person's specific financial situations. When financial literacy is provided in a group setting, the topics are usually included in household budgeting, understanding other Western financial practices, such as opening and maintaining a checking account or a credit card, building and repairing credit, as well as long-term saving plans. Majority of the communities that we serve, one of the biggest challenges we see is most of them work in either minimum or low-paying jobs. So saving might not be something that's realistic a lot of these cases. For our home ownership training, ADC's first-time home buyer workshop counseling program prepares and supports African immigrants and other low-income to moderate minority household using the home stretch curriculum. This program prepares prospective homeowners with resources, knowledge about home buying process, requirements, and best practices that ensure long-term home buyer success. Since we started this home ownership training, one of the things that we've seen the success is we've seen an increase in home purchases among African immigrants. We've also are seeing a lot of challenge with people who are looking for alternative financing. There's very limited options in terms of banks that offer no interest mortgages, profit-based. For our business development, entrepreneurship is an attractive option for many immigrants, and accessing conventional loans is difficult. ADC offers business development workshops, one-on-one technical assistance, small business financing that's tailored to the circumstance of African immigrants, as well as alternative financing options. So essentially what we do is we finance ideas, we provide seed money to start up businesses, and through our training program, prospective entrepreneurs receive information on how to start business, with information covering business writing classes, obtaining insurance, and addressing the best ways to market their business. One-on-one technical assistance is provided to those who attend the class, as well as existing business owners. Individualized and directed support helps with owners obtaining permit, licenses, and other requirements to open a small business. ADC works with business owners who are often not funded by mainstream lenders. Also, we provide alternative financing, which is culturally sensitive loans to those whose faith prohibits them taking interest-based loans. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Hibo. Don, you are up.
All right. Thank you, Anne. And thanks to the Red Group for inviting me here today. I'm glad to be able to share a bit on our Welcoming Communities initiative in central Minnesota. And so like Ann said, my name is Dawn Espe. I'm with Region 5 Development Commission. We serve a 5-county region in central Minnesota. I've been with the organization for a little over 6 years now, and in my role as a planner. And we started to get into this Welcoming Communities work about 2 years ago now, really focusing on that being one of our project programs. Regional development commissions were formed, back in the early 70s, and really set out to focus on planning physical, social, and economic needs of the community. And so the Welcoming Community Initiative, even though we're an economic development organization, we're still charged with the social well-being of our communities. And so that's how this kind of fits into our bucket, if you will. We really were recognizing, and the reason we got into this work is because we were recognizing with baby boomers retiring, we were experiencing workforce shortage like much of the nation was. And especially in our rural communities, we were feeling that a little bit more, I think, because of the perception of what is available out in rural. And so we started to get into this work with that workforce attraction in mind. And we also know that we have different social issues within our rural communities, such as, youth and LGBTQIA+. Suicide rates are high, but we also have high rates of suicide among our farmers and veterans as well. And so embracing these kind of welcoming communities where we're bridging those differences and creating those connections can really help mitigate and lower some of those suicide rates as well. Our rural communities are also experiencing, high opioid abuse numbers and mental health struggles that these kind of programs can also help address. And so we've been engaged in the welcoming communities work in a variety of ways to date. We started out with a Talent Advantage series. And so we partnered with a few organizations around the area, the Initiative Foundation, Sourcewell, our chambers of commerce, our local college. And we were able to gather employers together to really start talking about what it means to have a more inclusive workforce and what that could look like for them. And we got together about 130 employers, had a big kickoff event. And then for about a year after, there were just these little offshoot workshops that would happen with employers to continue to have these conversations. And so Region 5 as an organization recognized, okay, the employer side of things, that's going well. They've got it. They can go, we're out of there. Because we really wanted to start focusing on the health of the communities. Because what we were noticing is that the employers were doing a great job. But then once those folks punched out and went out into the community, they maybe weren't feeling those same welcoming sorts of vibes that they were feeling in their place of work. And so a couple of the things then that kind of happened because of those insights, we received a grant from Art Place America to start doing some creative placemaking at the Sprout Growers and Makers Marketplace. And that's where we were able to bring in low income and diverse populations of growers and artists and vendors, and to really be able to create a welcoming place that safely brought these communities together so that they had these connections that folks in rural communities maybe haven't had before. So just that very safe exposure to different foods, different music, different art, different language, just kind of incorporating that within our Sprout Marketplace. And then another part that we did was a few of us within Region 5 became, like Ann mentioned, intercultural development inventory qualified assessors. And so with funding from the Blandin Foundation and from the Northwest Area Foundation, we were able to do group assessments for 20 nonprofit, local units of government, school boards, economic development boards within our region. And what that tool did, and we recognized it was just a tool, but what that did is it gave us a starting point. It gave us a common language for us all to be kind of sharing within our region and kind of let us know where we were at. How good are we at bridging our cultural differences within our region? When we got done with those 20, we wanted to do more. It just felt like we let folks know where they're at, and then we said, good luck to you, and we were out of there. So fortunately, we received additional funding from the Northwest Area Foundation to continue our welcoming communities work. And to date, now we have we've started welcoming community advocacy groups. And so we have 8 groups within our region. Some of them are city groups, and some of them are more of a nonprofit group and organization. And we meet on a quarterly basis, sometimes a little less or more frequently. And we're talking about different DEI topics. And then the group also gets to put together a project or program. We give them a stipend of $10,000, a project or program that exemplifies how they're being welcoming. So again, each community is kind of different on where they're at in terms of their cultural development. And so we just take a look at each community individually and help them kind of have those conversations and find out where they might need to put some of their focus. All right, I know I'm probably running out of time here. What we've learned so far doing this work is that we really wanted to make sure when we entered into this space that we were not causing shame or making people feel bad about where they were at. Many times we've recognized in our rural communities, this is sometimes the first time folks have even had these conversations because it hasn't been necessary, because they've viewed themselves as being very, homogenous kind of place. But when you really start pulling out the demographics of their community, most of our rural communities have at least a 10% population with people of color. And they're surprised when they see that, because in some cases, when you have a town of 1,000 folks, that's 100 people, that's 100 people. And where are they? And why aren't we hearing from them? And why aren't they sharing our tables with us? So this is, like I said earlier, everybody's at a different part of their development. So just remembering to meet people where they're at. For some people, this is too fast. For some people, this is too slow. And as practitioners, we always have to keep reevaluating, how does this look within this community? How does this look within that community? And be respectful of where they're at in their journey. And then for me, this is more important for me as a practitioner, is just to be remembering to celebrate those small victories, because this is such a slow process, because it is so relational and relationships take time to build. Just to celebrate those small victories, be okay with now this document is in more than one language. That's a great victory, and celebrate that and embrace that, because those little steps all add up to bigger things. And then I just wanted to mention before I wrap up just a few other things that we're working on with regards to this initiative. We are working with a couple of storytellers. And so we have storytellers doing story circles and one-on-one interviews. And then they're connecting with artists, and these artists are making songs and poems based off of what they're hearing from these story circles. So that's a way to lift up different stories within our region. We're working in conjunction with Growth and Justice, with Jane Leonard here on the call, putting together a rural communities equity action guide that will share stories that highlight systems changes that are happening within our state around DEI. And another thing I really want to point out that we're doing that I'm pretty proud of is that alongside the Initiative Foundation and Sourcewell within our region, we're working on a criminal justice consortiums, where we're working with law enforcement and communities who have traditionally maybe not had positive interactions with law enforcement, and figuring out where can we bridge those differences and help those communities work together better. I think that's all I have.
Thank you so much, Dawn. That was great. This is so exciting, and some good questions coming in. Now I will turn it over to Pablo to share his experiences.
Yes, buenos dias, everyone. Thank you for the invitation and for the opportunity. I think one of the things about Southwest Initiative Foundation that I would like to pass on to you is that we are an organization that works through 18 counties in the southwest part of the state, and also includes the upper and lower Sioux communities. One of the main things that during these days we have been called to empower our communities is working together to end hate in our communities. We believe that dignity and belonging are core human values. and we stand against all forms of hatred and racism. We have been passing this message to our partners and to all people and organizations in our communities because we are alarmed and saddened by the presence of hate groups moving into our communities. Just outside of Wilmar, about 20 miles away, there is a new group, that white supremacy group related to KKK, who have purchased an old church and is trying to get organized and work from that location. And so moments like this empower us and fire us up a little bit to keep working on our vision. I have always been a person who believed in justice and peace. And I have the wonderful opportunity these days to help our region and to work hands-on, bring some equity and dignity, diversity and inclusion into our region. I have always hoped for conversations like the ones we've been here today. I have always hoped for moments in which we can have frank conversations and to speak our truth for years and years. And all of a sudden, this year, things just open up. So you have to be careful to what you hope for, because now we're in this time in which this theme of justice, equity, growth, and inclusion is all over us. I believe strongly that this is the time for our region to look at the mirror and frankly say, what is our position on racism? What is our position on our work with anti-racism efforts? Like Lieutenant Governor has been saying, we cannot sugarcoat it anymore. I've been in Minnesota since 1992, and I even myself have been tempted to be and use the Minnesota Nice effect in several parts of my life. But this time, I'm pretty sure that we need to continue to get outside of the traditional Minnesota Nice efforts and look and have conversations seriously about these. So the intersection of economics, the intersection of race, the intersection of poverty, I think has become crystal clear these days with George Floyd's assassination, with COVID-19. I think we have a very clear picture of how inequity our regions are and are in systems such as housing, education, economics, and race treatments. I think it's important for us to recognize that this is the time in which we can see very clear those differences and barriers that many people, especially people of color and new immigrants, are running into throughout the years. Strongly believe that when we talk about essential workers, sometimes we forget that we're not only talking about the essential workers that the system has in place, but we need to remember those who work in the lines, in meatpacking companies, or working in the fields, making sure that we all had our fresh produce this year. We need to remember those who are in nursing homes, trying to make sure that all the care that is necessary for our elderly and those who greater challenges than us, that those services continue to happen day and night. And many times when we talk about essential workers, we don't recognize that. So I am calling all of us to make sure that when we talk about essential workers, we include them and that we are advocates for their rights as well. because of all those essential workers hours that they are putting, the economy during COVID-19 in Minnesota has continued to try to move forward somehow in spite of the challenges. And these essential workers that I'm pointing out, I think are the ones that we need to be thinking on. In the midst of all of this, I want to give you and leave you with two hopeful illustrations. One is of a young lady who lives in Granite Falls, and that once I enter into her storefront building, I was shocked and surprised. I know that we have given a small business loan to her, and she's setting up a restaurant in which culture is going to be present and art. And I almost teary up because when I walk in there, you could see in her face and in the symbols and the decorations that she's putting up day by day into this future restaurant, that she wants to give hope to those who are coming to her facilities, to her restaurant. What a great example for all of us to continue to move into a hopeful day in spite of the challenges that we have. She decided to move forward. She's a resilient woman and face the odds, right? That probably this is not the best time to start a business, but she is moving forward. She's starting a business. She's speaking about race. She's speaking about bringing and welcoming everyone to her place. What a great example for us. And finally, another practical, hopeful experience for me is the network that I've been taking part of, which is called True Partnerships, Transforming Rural Understanding of Equity. Many of us who are here on this call are part of this network already, but this is a group that we all came together saying, how can we help move equity and understanding of equity to rural Minnesota? And the conversations began before COVID, and the consequence of COVID in us is an event called True Tuesdays. I will put the link in the chat room, and I hope that many of you can join us and feel the hope that I feel when we gather every third Tuesday to talk about issues in our region. Again, thank you so much for the opportunity, and I hope to meet you in person soon.
Thank you so much, Pablo, and Don and Hibo. That was great and very different perspectives, and we do have some questions. The first one is for Hibo, and it's a two-part question. One is, how have you found gender impacting entrepreneurship with the populations that you serve? And while you're speaking, if you could also talk about how you work with folks with bad credit to reestablish their credit so that they can participate.
Thank you. So with our work, we strive to have all genders equally. We don't target specific gender. We also understand through our culture, the responsibility and expectation are usually on the man, on sometimes the sons, if the father is not in the picture. But even that, so we make sure we help all entrepreneurs that come to our door equally. We tend to, for some reason, in the African community, have a lot of women who want to start business, usually some retail stores, salons, or different kind of industries they're interested in starting. So yeah, in terms of gender, we work with everybody equally. We don't tend to lean towards any particular gender. For the credit, so typically when people come to us, we do a soft pull of their credit so we can see what's already there. And when we do soft pull, it's not really impacting them. It's not going to show on their credit report. And with that, we look through if the person have any collections, whatever the situation is, and then we make a customized plan for that individual. And we give them a plan to follow. So if it's sometimes it's possible, a lot of the people that come to us don't even understand, like T-Mobile is notorious for putting people in collection for some odd reason, or insurances. And sometimes people forget they even had a particular insurance, which, I mean, I don't need to name a particular insurance, but Progressive is also notorious for putting people in collection. So sometimes people tend to forget, as they can see what's on their credit report, and then as we create for them a customized plan to follow and make sure they budget for it. And it might take them sometimes a year or more to build out their credit. We have entrepreneurs that come in, and we tend to work with them over a year and make sure they're ready to start their business, and they understand the importance of not only like keeping a good credit score, but what that can mean for them in the future. Thank you.
Oh, Don, a couple questions for you, sort of related to the IDI, but how do you meet people where they are, and particularly this conversation about not shaming, so that people feel that they can have these conversations? What are some of the practices you use or different things you've experienced that make that a little easier?
I think that was our favorite thing actually about the IDI assessment, was it allowed us to be able to share with organizations and share with individuals their ability to bridge those differences. But no matter where you are on the IDI continuum, there's a developmental opportunity and there's a strength. And even if you are in, what is deemed to be the highest honor on the continuum, you still have work to do. And so that's always been our thing from the beginning of this, is we don't want folk where you came from and what your values and beliefs and the root of those, that is what it is, that is who you are, and that's where you came from, and that's your family, and that's your heritage. But where did some of those beliefs come from? And if you kind of put some of those tests to it, do they hold up still? And trying to slowly unpack and reveal those sorts of aha moments for folks, I think. It's just always been our focus. So it's kind of there. And I think the IDI was really the way that gave us those tools to move forward in a more effective way.
Don, for you, Pablo, if you could talk a little bit about some of the generational things that you've seen in your work within the different communities, and how perhaps younger people and older people are engaging in participation and getting engaged in the economic development opportunities in your region.
Yes, I think the generational participation continues to surprise me. It hasn't surprised me in the past, but it's now definitely a nice surprise. I see children and young adults of immigrant or refugee families taking a step forward to be more bold about making sure that we live in an inclusive society. They are the ones that sometimes are pushing their parents to break cycles of employment or just being transparent in the community. They are the ones that invite their parents to soccer games so that they can be part of a community event, or that they are the ones that invite them to other refugees or ethnic communities activities because their best friends are hosting something. We are in a time in which I think we need to follow the lead of young immigrants and refugees. Many times we think that they still need to adjust. They are well adjusted. And if we listen to them, if we hear their vision, I think it will be easier for us to understand some of the challenges that the grown-ups have in terms of business or adapting to the community, or the relationship that some of the parents and grandparents have with the school system or the housing system or the health system. I think there is a unique moment, like I said, the time is now to to move in a direction in which we probably haven't even imagined in the past, moving this fast. But if we don't take the opportunity and don't take the lead of the children and youth in being bold, we may miss it.
Thank you. This would be a question for you, Pablo, again. Would you talk a little bit more about why you believe the time is now, that this is the time we should be doing it?
Well, 2020 has been a year that have imposed us with many things that we didn't expect. The pandemic, COVID-2020, have bolded, at least in my eyes, the differences that exist between people with privilege and people with not privilege. The time is now because after George Floyd was assassinated, you could see that the opportunity for the conversation about race and anti-racism and the systems that needs change. I mean, this is a great moment for us to have these conversations. The time is now because people like Mitch Berg up in northern Minnesota is willing and daring to get into a world in which American Indians are being treated unjust, and he's finding ways on how communities and the cities and the region, the systems are welcoming and starting to have a conversation with them to make sure that they continue to be treated and their voices are heard. And the time is now because I personally believe that I have been brought to Minnesota and to the States to be that change agent. So, so I know in the outside factors, I can see signs that this is a great time to do it. But within my guts, I also feel like that it is the right time.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to ask all three of our panelists, whichever of you wants to answer this. The Lieutenant Governor was talking about the anti-racism questions and tools that the state government is using as it looks at new legislation. And I'm wondering if you have applied those kinds of practices to your work and what you might have found out if you have looked at some of the ways that your organization works, and can you do a better job with it? So sort of that introspective look. And I would open it up for any of the three of you who would like to comment. Or I can call on you. How about Don? Why don't you take a look at that? Because I'm guessing it might have been part of your work with the welcoming communities, and then we'll ask Hibo and Pablo.
Okay, I need you to reframe the question for me. My brain is going in a million different ways, so.
Okay, so the Lieutenant Governor was talking about the anti-racism tool that they are using as they look at different initiatives. And I'm wondering if in your work, your organization has done something similar. So stepped back and asked, how is what we're doing dismantling systemic racism, or maybe unintentionally contributing to it? And I know I'm putting you on the spot, so thank you.
Yeah, that's I think we step back. This whole process, because this is work that we hadn't really been involved in before this deeply, the last 2 years have been such a learning process, I think, for our organization. And I think we're constantly doing that, trying to step back and ask, is this the right way? What can we do differently here? Are we approaching this through, I mean, we recognize that we're a group of white women trying to do this kind of work in rural Minnesota. And so, yeah, we ask ourselves that a lot. I think one of the things that we've done right now that has been very useful for me is we've been able to engage some IDI qualified assessors from our region who are people of color and who are able to really walk us through and give us that other view that we don't have, and we don't have a ton of experience with. And so, yeah, I mean, I would say we're constantly reevaluating how it is that we're doing it. And are we stumbling at times? Probably, absolutely, yes, but we are continuing to always tweak and grow, and not just this is how it is and this is how it's going to be. We recognize that there's always changes. Yeah.
Done. Hibo, do you have any comments you'd like to make on this notion of policies that maybe contribute to systemic racism without people ever really examining them? Have you bumped into that in your work?
I know now with the pandemic, a lot of, and not only just the pandemic, the uprisings and the riots that have been happening definitely brought up a lot of systemic racism that we haven't, as an immigrant, we weren't really part of the history with the African American, the indigenous people have experienced. So we're very new, and in some ways, for me personally, I feel like I haven't really looked into how we have been as immigrants benefited from their contribution, their hard work to get us here as immigrants. So just seeing this uprising, the pandemic really brought up a lot of issues that I think a lot of immigrants never really thought about. And yes, we have a lot of clients who have had their businesses impacted during the riot, who are scared, who are not sure what's next for them. Just seeing nationally what's going on in terms of politics. There's so much that are going on. I think as immigrants who fled their country because of either civil war or other issues, it's like, what's next for us and what does this mean for us as communities? So it is a challenging time. The best that we can do is just take one day at a time and just, step back and see how we can contribute in a meaningful way. The work we do here at ADC, and making sure that people, when they come to us, at least, we're providing them some resources and some guidelines and just being there for them. Sometimes we have a woman whose business is completely burned down, and it's hard to offer answers, but we also are part of Heal and Rebuild Lake Street. So we're finding ways that as an organization, we can also help the entrepreneurs who are impacted in Lake Street. So it's definitely been a very different compound with the pandemic. So it really brought out a lot of injustices that I think as an immigrant, we were never, I shouldn't say we were never, but we never really thought about it because we're here and we just have these goals okay, I want to, how can I get to the next stage in life? How can I, so it's been difficult, but yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Hibo. Pablo, do you have anything you'd like to add about the, looking internally perhaps at the work that your organization does and needing to change it because it might be contributing unintentionally to systemic racism or things that the foundation has done?
Sure. Just a couple of things so that I don't overlap with what has been said already. One is a few years ago, Blue Cross Blue Shield established a program in Wilmer called Healthy Together. And they were very intentional in making sure that they offer a different alternative to especially immigrant entrepreneurs or any kind of ideas that wanted to ask for a grant. And the process that they brought was very, very different from what normally was in the system in place. And they have been very successful. And they prepared Wilmer community to moments like the COVID-19 epidemic, because a lot of the organizations already follow the lead of Healthy Together. said we need to also be flexible with how things are going, what we are going to ask of the new ideas or new projects during this pandemic. So that was a blessing in the sky that Blue Cross and the Healthy Together program in Wilmar did for us in Wilmar. And in the overall, I think one of the things that we haven't said is let's sit down with minorities and immigrants and refugees or people living in poverty and listen to what ideas they can offer to us. And I think that is what Southwest Initiative Foundation is intentionally taking the step of listen and learn, and then see if there is a way that we can partner with our neighbors about bringing solutions to their lives, their families, and our communities.
Thank you. Echoing a little bit what the Lieutenant Governor said, right? To sit
Right.
down. Yes, thank you. Appreciate the energy that the panelists put into developing their programs and introducing us to little slivers of different ways of working on this important topic throughout the state. Now we're going to try to engage in something a little different, to have a group chat. And there's some folks of you have been active on chat, some are sitting back. And what I'd like to do is have this conversation. And as you've listened to the presentations and heard the experiences of people, what questions has this raised for you? Any aha moments? How are you thinking about bringing this back into your organizations so that you are perhaps looking with a new lens at some of the things? And Cheryl Hills from Region 5 has been talking a little bit about the tension. And I have a request, Cheryl, if you would care to speak a little bit about that and maybe start this conversation going, even though I know you probably weren't prepared for this, a request that you, I'm just picking on Region 5 today, but a request that you talk about that being bold, but not just standing back. So if you would, Cheryl, that would be great.
So there is a natural tension, just saying, between wanting to help meet communities where they are and being able to have the conversation, to even just start these conversations with what Pablo was talking about and wanting to be bold and moving forward. And what Don said is we literally, we're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. I mean, we're dedicated to the work and we will continue to do it. But as practitioners and those in the field, it is a natural tension to be in predominantly white communities that are struggling with having these conversations. There are more progressive areas of the state, no doubt. But where we reside, that is a tension that we have to walk a tightrope. And I understand, if you don't put people in those uncomfortable situations, then you don't have the conversations that truly matter. But you have to do this space with trust and authentic relationships to really talk about where their perceptions came from, to what Don said. And that's that takes a while. And if we push too hard, we shut people out. We shut them down. They won't talk to us. We can't build the trust. Can't have the conversations. Can't get there. But if we don't push hard enough, then, we're placating to a patriarchal system that is dominated by and on and on and on, right? So we're damned if we do, we're damned if we don't. And that's the way it feels sometimes. And that natural tension is a difficult place to reside in. It is easier when you are, and I will say this out loud to my foundation partners, when you have a power of a purse and you have progressive views, within your organization. But when you're in community, or you are a state agency who has the power of the purse and you say, this is how it's going to go, like Peggy talked about, that's not so hard to do, by the way. Sit in community where you're between those two. That's a difficult place and fun to talk about and break out maybe.
Thank you, Cheryl. There's also a comment from Jane Leonard that frequently progressive organizations, development commissions, initiative funds, et cetera, want to move quickly, but there can be some pushback, perhaps from some of the local elected officials or some of the other institutions that might not share those same goals or have a constituency that pushes back on them as well. We have this notion of thank you for being willing to speak to the fierce urgency of now from Kevin Lindsay, which I appreciate. This is our opportunity for a conversation. And we have another comment from Eric that, yes, Eric Mushler from the McKnight Foundation, that yes, the local is where the tension is the highest. And it's also where you can't hide. You're seeing people in the grocery store or at church or on the soccer field. You don't have the anonymity of a big city. So doing this work in rural comes with some of its own challenges. And I know there's been pushback in a lot of communities, and some of it very aggressive pushback. And that I know that has happened in some of the regions as well. Other thoughts from folks? So we can share in the chat. Going once, going twice. Oh, we're getting some things here. But it is that local, that focus on local. So if you guys are typed out and tapped out, what I will ask is that you fill out one final poll. And we use these polls, the process design group sees the results of these, and it helps us tailor our forums so that they serve our members and you get the most out of them. So I will ask Becky in a moment to put up the poll, but I would like her to show her face. Some of you can see it, some of you haven't, but Becky is with the Blandon Foundation, and we are using their subscription because it can host a large number of people. And Becky has put together all the wizardry and put you into rooms and pulled you back, and want to thank her for doing that work. So Becky, if you would, thank you. You did the namaste. Excellent. Well, folks, then if you would take the poll, we will adjourn, but I would appreciate it if you would leave some feedback so that we can continue to tailor these forums to your tastes and to what you want. So thank you so much. Good to see your pixels.